My mother sat across from me at my sister's wedding reception, swirling the wine in her glass, and asked when I was finally going to let the past go and forgive Derek. She said his name the way you'd say the name of an old family friend who'd simply moved out of town, not the name of the man who raped me when I was 16 years old. I need to tell you how we got to that table because when I first told this story out loud to my therapist, she said the thing everyone eventually says: I don't understand how a mother could do that. I still don't fully understand it either. But I lived through every part of it, and I'm going to tell you all of it, because somewhere out there is a woman who needs to hear that you don't owe anyone your child's safety, not even the person who gave you life. My name is Everly. I grew up in a small town about 40 minutes outside Chattanooga, Tennessee, the kind of place where everybody went to one of 3 churches and half the town worked for the other half. My mother was the office manager for a construction company owned by the Colson family, one of the good families, the kind with their name on a wing of the hospital and a reserved pew on Sunday mornings. Derek Colson was their only son, 22 at the time, and the best friend of my boyfriend Nathan. My mother adored Derek. She was never particularly warm to Nathan. She used to say he was going nowhere, but Derek could do no wrong in her eyes. So when Derek assaulted me at a bonfire, "Are you sure," she said, "that's really what happened?" I was 16. She was supposed to be the one person who didn't ask me that question, but I would later understand exactly why she did. Derek's mother, Linda Colson, was my mother's boss, and my mother was terrified of losing that job. I refused to stay quiet. I went to the police against my mother's wishes, and she made it clear in the coldest way a parent can that I'd chosen wrong. The house became unlivable, so I moved in with Nathan and his parents while we waited for a trial date. That's where I found out I was pregnant. Nathan and I had never been intimate, and there had been no one else. There was only one possibility, and it made the months that followed feel like living underwater. The trial ended almost a year later. Derek took a plea deal. No prison time, just probation, community service, and one condition that felt like the only mercy in the whole process: he would have no legal right ever to contact or seek custody of any child that resulted from that night. My daughter Nora was born 5 months after the trial closed. The day she came into the world, my mother called and asked for the first time in a year if she could come see her granddaughter. She apologized. She cried. She said she'd been wrong. I forgave her. I want to be honest about that because I think people need to hear that forgiving someone too quickly isn't a character flaw. It's just what happens when you're exhausted and you miss your mother and she's saying all the right words. I was 20 years old with a newborn, finishing a degree and running on almost no sleep, when the one person who was supposed to steady me showed up saying, "I was wrong, let me help." I didn't have the strength left to ask why she'd changed her mind so suddenly, or why the timing lined up so perfectly with the day my daughter was born. For a while it was good. My mother retired early specifically to help with Nora while I finished my degree at the University of Tennessee a couple hours away. I stayed on campus during the week and came home most weekends. She cooked Sunday dinners. She was by every visible measure the grandmother I'd hoped she'd become. Then one Thursday in February, a snowstorm shut down my classes 2 days early. I decided to surprise her and drive home a day ahead of schedule. I walked into my mother's kitchen and found Linda Colson at the table, and Derek, holding my daughter. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember my hands grabbing Nora, my feet carrying us both to her nursery to pack a bag, my mother sobbing behind me, begging me to stop, to listen, to forgive her. On my way out the door, Derek caught my arm and told me quietly that I ought to be nicer to my own mother. I didn't answer him. I got in the car, and I didn't look back. My mother called me 200 times over the following month. I never picked up. A week after that day in the kitchen, $75,000 appeared in my bank account with no note attached. I never asked where it came from. I think some part of me already knew it wasn't an apology, it was hush money, and I refused to spend a cent of it. For 10 years, that was where things stood. I built a life with Nathan. We had a son, Caleb. I didn't speak to my mother, and Nora grew up not knowing her grandmother existed. Then my younger sister got married, and I couldn't avoid my mother any longer. Standing in the reception hall in a dress I didn't feel like myself in, I let her ask about Nora, about Caleb, about the pregnancy I was 3 months into at the time. She told me she wanted to make things right before she died. She told me, and I remember this word for word, that she'd always believed me. She said she just hadn't wanted to lose her job. I asked if she still spent time with Linda Colson. "Sometimes," she said. "Mostly at church." I let it go that night because I didn't want to make a scene at my sister's wedding. But I thought about it for days afterward, about how my mother had spent a decade sitting in pews next to the woman who told half our town that I'd lied about my own assault, that Derek and I had actually slept together, and I'd cried rape out of guilt. And somehow, I still called my mother the next week. I wanted to try. I wanted one more time, to see if there was a version of her I could have back. The call started fine, then it turned to church, and church turned to Derek. My mother mentioned almost cheerfully how much Nora resembled his other children, as if I was supposed to find that sweet. When I told her I didn't want to discuss him, she kept going anyway. She said he was a changed man. She said he felt terrible about what he'd done. She said I should be over it by now since it happened so long ago. My mother had never once heard what actually happened to me from my own mouth. She had only ever heard Derek's version, so I told her, all of it in detail. I had never given her before. And I told her that if she brought his name up to me one more time, I would lose every ounce of respect I had left for her. I told her not to call me again. I told her I would never let my children anywhere near her because I could no longer trust her with them. My hands were still shaking when I hung up. 2 weeks later, a package arrived for Nora with no return address, pink wrapping paper, a bow, a silver necklace inside, and a note that read, "For Nora, from someone who's always cared." My husband and I threw it away without telling her. Over the next few weeks, more followed: a bracelet, a keepsake journal, a photo album with empty pages waiting to be filled. Each one went in the trash. I started intercepting our mail before Nora ever saw it. Then Nora came home from school one afternoon glowing about a new online friend named Julian, who she said knew so much about our family stuff even you probably don't know. My stomach dropped. When I looked through the messages on her phone, I found details no stranger should have had: my mother's old employer, the town we used to live in, names of relatives I had never once mentioned to my daughter. I had her block the account that night and explained, as gently as I could, why she could never talk to strangers online again. I called my mother. She denied knowing anything until I asked whether Nora had liked the gifts, and she caught herself a half-second too late. She knew. She had let this happen and said nothing. After that, Derek stopped hiding. He showed up at the edges of Nora's life: the back of her school concert, the parking lot at her soccer games, a grocery store aisle. Always visible, never close enough to break any law. It was a game, and I was losing my mind playing it. Eventually, I drove to his house myself and told him to stay away from my family. He didn't deny anything. He just smiled and reminded me that courts tend to favor reformed parents, especially when the other parent looks unstable and controlling. It sounded less like a threat and more like a plan he'd already started executing. Around that time, I did something I'd never done before. I asked our neighborhood for help. I'd lived on the same street for years, coached Nora's soccer team, brought casseroles when someone was sick. So I organized a small gathering at the park down the road and told our neighbors, without going into the worst of it, that someone from my past was trying to work his way back into my daughter's life, and that I needed extra eyes, watching out for her. I braced myself for awkward silence. Instead, people started offering to trade off school pickups to keep porch cameras running to text if they saw anything unusual. Paige, who lived 2 houses down, pulled me aside afterward and said, "If anyone tries to spread lies about you on this street, they'll have to go through all of us first." It was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't fighting this alone. He was right to be confident, though. A few months later, my mother and Derek filed a joint petition with Child Protective Services, accusing me of emotionally alienating Nora from her biological family. My own mother had teamed up with the man who raped me to try to take my daughter. We fought it with everything we had. Our lawyer Preston built a case out of the anonymous gifts, the fake online account security footage of Derek near our home, and phone records that placed calls between my mother and Derek right before each package arrived. In court, my mother cried on the stand and claimed she only wanted to help the family heal. Under cross-examination, the phone records made that story fall apart in front of the judge. I sat through hours of testimony that day, feeling like I was watching my life get rewritten by strangers. Derek's lawyer described him as a reformed man who'd simply wanted to know his daughter existed. Character witnesses from his church talked about his volunteer work and his transformation. My mother took the stand and cried, describing me as a woman who'd cruelly cut her off from her only grandchildren. It was only under cross-examination, when our lawyer laid out the phone records lining up with each anonymous package, that her composure finally cracked in front of the judge. Near the end of the hearing, the judge called a recess and spoke privately with Nora in her chambers, something none of us had prepared her for. We hadn't told her the full extent of what was happening. We'd only said that some people were trying to cause trouble, and a judge would help sort it out. 20 minutes felt like hours. When the judge finally returned, her expression had changed. She denied the petition outright and issued a permanent restraining order against Derek. Relief hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. As we left the courthouse, Derek brushed past me and said quietly, "This isn't over." My mother followed him out without once looking at me. The quiet that followed didn't last. Small, deniable things started happening. My husband's brake line failed an inspection our mechanic caught just in time. Nora's school got an anonymous tip about her locker that led to a humiliating, fruitless search. Our neighbor and closest friend, Paige, had digitally altered photos sent to her husband's office, implying an affair that nearly ended her marriage. None of it could be tied to Derek directly. but the pattern was unmistakable. He was punishing everyone who had stood beside us. Then Nora mentioned a new school counselor, a Mr. Voss, who kept steering their sessions toward questions about our family and whether she ever felt like she was missing something. His credentials checked out on paper, but something about him set off every instinct I had. A private investigator we hired eventually confirmed it. His references were forged and he was Derek's cousin. Around the same time, a woman named Renee reached out to me out of nowhere. She turned out to be Derek's ex-wife, the mother of his other children, and she told me a story that made my blood run cold. She'd left him years earlier after learning what he'd done to their teenage babysitter, and he had spent years afterward quietly dismantling her life in retaliation. She'd tracked down other women he'd targeted since. I wasn't the first family this had happened to, and I wouldn't be the last unless someone stopped him for good. With Renee's documentation and our own, the police finally treated it as an organized pattern rather than isolated harassment, and the FBI opened a case. The turning point came the night I woke at 3 a.m. to find Nora's bedroom window cracked open and a photograph left on her desk. Derek holding a baby with a handwritten line on the back. "She looks just like you did. Nothing was taken. Nothing was damaged. He simply wanted us to know he could get in whenever he wanted." We pulled Nora out of school for the rest of the year. 2 weeks later, Mr. Voss vanished from the district. Derek's house was emptied out overnight and my mother's phone was disconnected. They had gone dark all at once. Then came a letter with no return. Address, a date, a time, a location. The park where Nora used to play as a little girl, and a single line in Derek's handwriting. "Come alone if you want this to end." I went with my husband and Renee waiting nearby in case I needed to call for help. But it wasn't Derek sitting on the bench when I arrived. It was my mother, smaller and older than I remembered. "He's not coming," she said. "He sent me to deliver a message. He wanted one photo of Nora every year mailed to a P.O. box. No return address required, just proof she was okay. In exchange, he'd disappear for good." If I refused, my mother said, his voice through her was clear, "He would make my life so much worse than anything you've experienced so far." "You always had a choice," I told her. "You just never chose me." I didn't take the envelope. I called the police the moment I got home and reported everything. They found my mother still sitting on that bench, insisting she had no idea where Derek had gone. For a while, nothing moved. Then my mother had a heart attack. My sister begged me to visit her in the hospital, and after an hour sitting in the parking lot, I finally went in alone. She looked impossibly small in that bed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I chose wrong every time. I see that now." I told her I hoped she recovered. I couldn't promise her more than that. As I turned to leave, she called out that Derek still contacted her sometimes from Mexico, and that she could help find him. Whether it came from guilt or fear of dying with this unfinished, she reached out to the FBI herself that same week and gave them everything she had: email addresses, financial details, names of people who'd helped him. Months later, the break came from an unexpected place. Derek's current wife, living in Mexico City, found our story through the small network Renee had built and reached out herself. She'd grown afraid of him and wanted out. With her cooperation, federal agents on both sides of the border coordinated a quiet arrest. He was taken into custody without incident, in an apartment full of surveillance files on every family he'd targeted, including ours. My mother passed away 2 weeks after his arrest. I went to her funeral without my children. I said goodbye to a woman who protected everyone except the one person she should have protected first. I've forgiven her in the quiet way you forgive someone you'll never fully trust again, not because she earned it, but because carrying that anger any further wasn't going to help me raise my kids. Derek is currently awaiting extradition, Mr. Voss took a plea deal after being tied to harassment cases in 3 other states, and the FBI agent who worked our case told me it's helped them connect at least 4 more families who'd gone through some version of what we lived. Nora is 15 now, back in school, playing on the soccer team again, thriving in a way I wasn't sure she'd get to. She still asks sometimes why she doesn't have a grandmother like her friends do. I tell her the truth in pieces she can carry, that some adults make choices that break families, and that choosing safety over blood isn't a failure of love, it's the whole point of it. Caleb is too young to understand any of this yet, and I've promised myself I'll tell him the full story when he's old enough to hold it the same way I'm slowly doing with Nora. My husband and I still go to counseling most weeks, not because our marriage is in trouble, but because 11 years of living braced for the next attack leaves marks you don't get to skip past just because the danger is gone. He never once suggested I should have handled things differently. Never once made me feel like a burden for needing security cameras and background checks and a lawyer on speed dial. I think that's its own kind of love people don't talk about enough, the kind that just stays quietly through the ugliest years. I still double-check the locks every night. I still scan parking lots out of habit, still feel my pulse spike when a car slows down near the house. Renee, who's become one of my closest friends through all of this, tells me that feeling may never fully leave, and I've made peace with that. What I haven't made peace with, and never will, is the idea that loyalty to family should ever outrank the safety of a child. My mother spent a decade asking me to forgive the man who hurt me so that her own life could stay comfortable. She wanted peace, and she wanted it more than she wanted to protect either of us. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: you are allowed to refuse that trade. Every single time, for as many times as it's asked of you. Protecting your child isn't the thing that breaks your family, it's the only thing that was ever going to save it.